Good morning. Good morning, community. Oh, good morning. So wonderful to see you all this morning for morning coffee with the Foundation for Black Women's Wellness. We will allow you all to join on this beautiful Wednesday morning, August 12th, as we talk about a very difficult topic today. But as always, first and foremost, we are grateful to have you join us. Good morning. Good morning and welcome to Morning Coffee with the Foundation for Black Women's Wellness. Good morning. I think I saw Aaron Perry. Very happy to see you, Aaron Perry. In fact, we may unmute you at some point during this call to share some information with us, as we know this is one of your expert areas. Good morning, Jacqueline Bogus. Good morning, Madison and friends far and wide. Welcome to Morning Coffee with the Foundation for Black Women's Wellness. My name is Lisa Payton Kerr, founder, CEO, and president of the Foundation for Black Women's Wellness, and I'm here with our wonderful team this morning to welcome you to Morning Coffee. I'm sure that our Facebook Live feed has caught up with our Zoom feed, so we welcome our Facebook Live guests this morning and everyone tuning in across our city this morning to talk about confronting violence in our community, roots, solutions, and actions. Each week when we plan our morning coffee calls, we think about current issues, community issues, and this one stood out to us as we all see what seems to be an uptick in violence in our community. So we thought it imperative to switch gears this morning to address this topic as a community, not just once, but as an ongoing conversation that is vital for us to have. But before I dig into that, I'd like to welcome you again on behalf of our team and to welcome our three guest speakers today. Pastor and Judge, the Honorable Judge Everett Mitchell is with us today, and I will share more about his bio in a moment. April Kigeya, who's a member of our team, but also a member of many teams in our community, activist, nonprofit leader, and mother and parent. And Aurielle Smith, who is with us today from Public Health Madison and Dane County. And again, I will share their bios in a moment. But first, as we always do weekly on our calls, we'd like to bring your attention to some special announcements and shout outs, which our Chief Programs Officer, Aaliyah Stevenson, will handle for us right now.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Welcome, everyone. We have several announcements today. Wanted to follow up from last week. Our masks are in. They are ready to be ordered. I am going to populate the chat box with how you can get your thank you, Lisa. Lisa's modeling our Well Black Woman mask right now. Please support and wear that. It has caused a number of fantastic conversations within the community when I'm wearing it. So pick yourselves up one. We also, of course, are getting ready to celebrate our 12th annual Black Women's Wellness Day. We are very excited to announce another new speaker this week, Ms. Aurielle Abrams, award-winning empowerment coach, speaker, author. You will be blown away. So I will put the link, how to register and get your tickets for the 12th annual Black Women's Wellness Day. And then more in line with the conversation that we're having today, I will be putting fundraiser information in the chat box for our 11-year-old baby in our community baby that got shot in the head yesterday and is in a coma fighting for her life right now. A family friend has put together a fundraiser, and we would encourage you to give as you are able. So I will populate all that information down here, and thank you so much for being with us.
Yes, and we'd also like you all to actively use the chat today. We always appreciate your comments. We know there are a lot of high emotions when we talk about violence in our community, when we talk about our babies being caught in the crosshairs. There's lots of ideas. There's lots of people doing work on multiple levels. Folks who get no press and folks who get press daily have been working to address this issue from a community perspective. Our community has been involved, is active, and we'd like to hear from you throughout this conversation, and we'll also pose questions to you. So today, again, we are very fortunate to have three very special guests with us today who are working on issues involving racial equity, justice, safety, families, public health, and we'd like to introduce them formally. Of course, you know the Honorable Judge Everett Mitchell, who was elected to the Dane County Circuit Court in April of 2016. He presides over Branch 4 in Dane County and is currently in rotation in the juvenile justice courts, where he presides over cases of family reunification, as well as young people who commit law violations. Judge Mitchell is committed to dismantling the pipeline from child welfare to juvenile delinquency to adult prison pipeline, which we know is operating in Dane County and throughout Wisconsin. I want to commend you, Pastor Mitchell, indeed, because we know your record in that work, not only as a judge, not only as a former district attorney for Dane County, but really as a very vocal and accessible advocate for young people and families in our community who we know off hours in your personal uncharted time how much you advocate for families. And we know that as the foundation because we've come to you to assist with very specific cases with families, and we appreciate your advocacy. You've worked in reentry services through Madison Urban Ministry in the past and have supervised restorative justice programs, which we know are a crucial part of this conversation. And you're also an ordained minister and pastor of Christ the Solid Rock Baptist Church, which is a cutting edge congregation of over 400 members, probably more at this time, who is also serving community in that incredible way, called at the age of 15 years old to the ministry. So you've been in this work for a mighty long time. There's so much more we can say about Judge Mitchell, Pastor Mitchell, Father, Husband Mitchell, but we'll wrap it up in saying thank you for being a dedicated advocate for justice for all, and especially for underserved communities, and bringing that perspective into your judgeship in our county. Aurielle Smith is Director of Policy, Planning, and Evaluation with Public Health Madison Dane County. That is a role that she took over in March of this year. She most recently, prior to that, has worked extensively in violence prevention work here in Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania, an incredible track record of addressing violence and trauma as a public health issue and creating and generating solutions for that. And that's why, Aurielle, we wanted you on this call this morning, because we know your perspective is extremely valuable. Right now, Aurielle is currently dedicated in large part to COVID-19 emergency response. You may have seen her over at the Alliant Energy Center, where she's commanding testing and other safety protocols. So just an expansive purview of safety, violence prevention, trauma-informed care and care delivery methods. And we thank you for being here in a very busy schedule today, Aurielle, to take time to be with us. April Kigeya, who is a family member of the foundation, but so many other things. As we were thinking about speakers, April, we thought that it would be very fitting and important to have your voice and your perspective as a local activist, a nonprofit leader, mother of 4 children, who works passionately on so many levels with underrepresented communities. April holds many titles, which we love. We believe in serving in many ways. So April is not only a special projects director for the Foundation for Black Women's Wellness, where she contributes daily to our strategy and programming and outreach to the community, but she's also the director of program design and outreach with Urban Triage, and an outreach specialist for the UW School of Medicine and Public Health, and numerous of other roles she plays on local boards in our city and county governments with our Dane County Democratic Party. Super active. We don't know how you find the time, and still manages to pour into her own children as she protects and safeguards the future of other children in our community. And there's more I can say about April. So thank you for the 3 of you for being here today with us. And we're just gonna jump right in. This is a very difficult conversation for us to prepare for, you all, because it's such a sensitive topic when we're talking about violence and gun violence in our community. And that whole conception of community, of course, we're all members of the larger Greater Madison community. So this is a community-wide conversation. But when we talk about violence within our African-American community, which is also a part of that larger community, it's sensitive because we know there are so many complex issues and they've been politicized over time, and they're connected to historical mischaracterization of our community as violent and in need of control and justifications for police brutality and over-policing. So it's a hard topic to discuss. But then there's the reality that violence harms, violence kills, and we have to have appropriate community response when it's happening. So within the context of that, we've had a rash of recent shootings in Greater Madison over the last several weeks that seems to be escalating. We know that it's not a large number of people, it's a small group of people in the overall scheme of things, but the violence is happening and it's affecting all of us. Our police chief Wall held a press conference yesterday where they announced the shooting that happened in the daylight hours on East Washington Avenue, where bullets were exchanged between two cars on a very public byway, and where an 11-year-old child, baby, was shot in the head, as Aaliyah mentioned at the beginning. And we do want you to go to that link that she provided in the chat to donate to this baby's fund. We have heard that she made it through her first surgery and she's in a medically induced coma. She is holding on to life. So not only do we need prayers, her family needs aid, and we need solutions to this problem because it is unacceptable and the reasons don't matter when babies are harmed. So that is happening. And in fact, I believe that it's at least the third case of open air gunfire exchanged in Madison that I've read about. One happening on John Nolan Drive, 1 or 2 East Washington. These are major thoroughfares that we all travel, and other folks not involved have been harmed and hurt as well. We've heard retaliatory gunfire occurred last week at Garner Park at a memorial service for a young man who was killed, for I think 24-year-old young man who was killed. Listen to those words, 23-year-old young man who was killed. I have 24, 27-year-old sons, right? We have children in this community, was killed, and there was retaliatory gunfire right on the west side, Mineral Point Road, of folks who were getting back for something. I drove past this scene with my child in the car as I saw about 100 police cars surrounding this park, only to learn that there had been gunfire at a memorial service on the west side. We've heard the mayor's statements. We're already in the midst of a pandemic where emotions are high, instability is high, economic insecurity is high, unemployment is rising, people are losing housing, all within the context of pre-existing inequities and disparities, COVID-19, all of that. Police killings of Black folks, which are not resolved in our legal system, and our country has not decided yet its position on protecting Black lives, yet we're talking about protecting Black lives even within our own community. Where do we begin? So my first question, and I'm gonna put this to you, Judge Mitchell, and then I'll ask Aurielle and April to follow. What are your thoughts on what appears to be this uptick in violence in Greater Madison? What is causing this right now? Can't hear you. Let's unmute Pastor Mitchell.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
I always say that the fundamental issue for me is how many of our communities have struggled with being able to have the right influence and connection over a large part of our community, or a small part of our community that feels disconnected and lost and not able to connect to, whatever we think is a just and fair community. Like, I love reading the book Disintegration, because in the book he talks about 4 different types of African American communities: the elite community, the immigrant community, the biracial community, and the abandoned community. And when we think about the violence that we see in our community, and I've had the unfortunate privilege of burying too many young Black men killed on black violence, and having to deal with families who lose their babies and sons, and children who are going to grow up without their fathers. And I understand that we have within our own community an abandoned community that doesn't have the bridges, and they don't know how to begin to integrate into other spaces and begin to use the power within our historical legacy to get outside of the systems of violence that they have created within their own communities. And so because we no longer have the bridge to go back into those communities, many of us who have moved out of those spaces or moved into different spaces really have no influence. And they don't listen to none of us. There's none of us that could go and be like, yo, man, if y'all don't put that gun down, stop acting a fool, what's wrong with y'all? And because of that, they continue to, ramp up. And so they don't see many of us as committed to our communities, because there's not a lot who are having, feet in every aspect of community, because we are so divided. And I think a part of the violence is that Kwanzaa Kunjufu said this, and I think this is still appropriate today as it was when he said it back in the day. We have to give our children, especially Black boys, something to lose. Children make foolish choices when they have nothing to lose. And we have really allowed these young people with no bridges. They feel like they have no bridge. They feel like they have no future. And when they think that they have no future, no bridge, and then they're walking around with this internalized trauma that nobody has addressed, nobody has stopped in the multiple systems that they have been involved in, then they think that the only path for them is either violence or to be connected to the communities that accept them for who they are. And I think there's a lot of work that has to be done around making sure that we don't stigmatize young people in ways that we sometimes do. Pull your pants up, or, cut your hair, do this. No, how about we participate in accepting them for all facets of who they are? And when we're able to be in a position that they trust us, then we can begin to reorganize their expectations of what is possible. But until we're in that space of being able to have influence and be able to build those bridges for them, then we won't be able to, maximize our ability to stop that violence and to cease them from thinking that this is the only way that our people can respond to one another.
Oh, so much wrapped into that answer. I can think of all the sub questions that we want to have, that we want to ask around so many pieces of young people feeling abandoned, that the bridges that tie us together have been broken, and there's massive conversations about how we rebuild those bridges. Really, really important that you distinguished from the book Disintegration that we are not a monolithic community, and that these issues perplex even the Black community, as we don't all live the same experience. And building those bridges is crucial as we look internally for solutions. Aurielle, from a public health perspective, from a trauma-informed perspective, as Pastor and Judge Mitchell stated, we know so many of the young people who become adults who are involved in this violence come from traumatic backgrounds, have had traumatized experiences, are disconnected from opportunity. What are your thoughts on what is causing this right now?
So thank you so much. I think one of the things I like to always ground myself in my practice in violence prevention, and ground some of our staff who are also working on it, is hurt people hurt people. And I think that phrase is unbelievably true as we look at the patterns of violence that we are seeing in Madison, and we look to the youth who are experiencing that trauma, and that trauma is not being addressed in both on the individual level and also both from that community level, exactly as Pastor Mitchell said. And so for us, I think it's really important to look at kind of that toxic stress syndrome that we as the Black community continue to face and feel, and haven't really addressed what that looks like for those varying layers of us. Because again, I think it's important to remember we all have various different experiences, and there is a level of perpetual stress that we all feel just being Black in America. And how do we address that? How do we approach that? How do we adequately work through that and talk through that and address that both from that individual and community level? And then also pass that on to our youth so that they also have the tools and strategies needed to be a Black person in America. And that's really, for me, where that upstream primary violence prevention begins, is us having those tools from the start to help us combat all the things that we will face as Black people.
Thank you. And I'll ask you again, Aurielle, later in the call to help us understand what a public health approach to violence prevention looks like as an organization that works to dismantle racial disparities, racial health disparities. We know that understanding the traumas and yes, the dysfunctional pieces of our own community, because we got to confront and say there are dysfunctional pieces of our own community. We all play a part in it at every level, whichever part of our community that we represent. We need to understand this as a spiritual, as a public health, as a policy, as a family issue, and to better understand what public health strategies are at play in addressing those multiple layers. April Kigeya, what are your thoughts about what appears to be an uptick in violence and what is causing this?
I mean, I think Pastor Mitchell and Aurielle both hit on it. For me, it's trauma, right? So we can't have a community who is ingrained in trauma, untreated trauma, and expect the outcome to be any different. So we have to meet them where they're at. There is this divide, and we have to, programs work, yes, they're great, but at the same time, we have to actually individualize what we want to change. So we need to meet with these people. We need to figure out what it is that they're suffering from. I mean, it's a cycle of violence. If you're in a community where that's all you see every day, that's your norm. It's like a fish in water. You try to take the fish doesn't know what's in water because it's in the water. They don't know anything other than what they're involved in. So we need to stop this whole division and about the system. The system is working. The system was set up to work how it's working right now. So we need to take a different approach and band together as a community to meet these people where they're at, or else it's not going to stop.
So each of you have spoken to the issue, and it's a question that I formed, but I think you've answered it in asking what drives the violence we see. And some of this is rhetorical, you all, for the sake of public conversation. I think we all understand where the violence stems from. You've spoken about trauma. We've talked about cycles of violence, but we need to frame that so that when we have these conversations in a broader context of community where there's massive judgment, where there's massive politicization, where there's massive response as police them, criminal justice response, lock them up, throw away the key. There's more nuances than that. What nuanced pieces do we need to have in the public sphere in understanding on the surface what just appears to be violence, the particular type of violence that takes place in the African American community when it occurs? And I say the particular type because violence occurs in every community. Violence is not unique to the Black community. We have a violent history. Racism is violence. Much of this is caused by racialized trauma, racialized systems of inequity that have brought violence to how we live our lives. But in that particular case, what framing, Pastor and Judge Mitchell, is important as we have public and policy and response conversations about addressing violence right now?
I think, all of us are, on the same page with giving a language to the idea that this internalized trauma is very important for us to deal with. The reason I continue to support Black women wellness is because one of the trends I started to see in the court that was leading to more young people stealing more cars, becoming more violent, is because I saw something I had never seen in my life as a Black man or as a Black leader, and that was Black women choosing not to raise their children. I had never seen that before. I had never understood that was a paradigm. But I wasn't coming into court basically hearing Black mothers look at their sons and say, I don't got nothing to deal with it. I'm tired of them. You deal with it. And when I saw that, I realized that there's a shift in our community, whether we talk about it or not, something has shifted. And so because of that shift, now we're talking about how then do we support children that have had nobody there, that there's no church, there's no school, there's no parents, there's no grandparents, there's nobody for these children. And we wonder why they then fall into groups that then perpetuate violence as a way to resolve their frustration. They are angry, they are upset, they're ticked off, they peed off, they are, fed up to the highest level, and they do not have the capacity to be able to emotionally regulate themselves. So every moment, every second, every interaction, they're literally flooded with emotions, and anything will trigger that emotion because they're struggling from post-traumatic stress disorder. And we have not given them, as my sister Smith said, we have not given them the tools because none of us are in that right space. And I promise you, as a judge, this system is working the way it is designed to do. And they are funneling our babies. And all of the systems that we on the public seem like it's working fine, it is not working. They do not prioritize these babies. And because they don't prioritize these babies, they are funneling these little babies, and then they become grown people. That young man that shot those, allegedly shot those two doctors on it. I mean, his caseload was just horrible. I mean, the stuff that boy was going through day after day, and no resolution to his pain until, we had to be forcefully to step in to help that boy. I mean, the stories go on and on and on. So I think we have to begin to be honest about the narratives that have shifted on us. And while we're trying to sometimes hold on to certain narratives, there's a shift that has happened in our community, and we have to be ready to deal with that shift and reinforce the power of our family systems and support those mothers, support those fathers, support those aunts and uncles, so that they can begin to have the emotional resource to then put that back into these children. If we don't frame it right, Lisa, we're going to be right back at this place all over again, asking the same questions because we're seeking different solutions for the wrong questions.
And I think, can I just add something? I think to that, Pastor Mitchell, we need a community response. So we need to stop this division amongst, that's the people in the ghetto, whatever. Like, no, back in the day, people came together as a family. Black people, period. Like, we need to stop this division. We need to come together and say, these are our babies. The people that are shooting are still our babies too. There's something that happened to them that they need help with. The violence is a reaction to something else. And we need to, in order to get to that, we need to put all this division aside and say, okay, these people need help. How can we help them? How can we support them? Instead of, throwing these programs out, we need to actually get to the root of the problem. So I think in my perspective, community response is our number one thing, and we need to come together. And to that note, not to be, this is probably gonna sound bad, but we also need more Black men to step up, because we have a lot of Black women on the lines who are supporting the work, doing the work. There are Black men too, yes, but at the same time, where are the men at? Where y'all at? Like, we can't do it alone, so.
Oh, Aurielle, would you like to add to that? And I have so many comments that are bursting in, and then I'm going to ask Aaliyah to tell us what's happening in the chat. One thing for the chat, you all, we want to hear your response to a question. What concerns you most, audience, about the recent acts of violence in our community, and how is it affecting you? What concerns you most, and how is it affecting you? Aurielle, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I echo exactly what Pastor Mitchell and April both spoke to, right? The responsibility is on us to come together as the Black community, as a family, and wrap our arms around these youth and these individuals that are struggling. And that is really what we need. We need Black women, we need Black men, we need youth. We need those who are still in that younger age category and can relate to some of the things that they are going to lend some of that peer support. And I think we as a community have to take some responsibility and say, like, we need to look out for our own. Back in the day, that was the thing. We were a group, we were a family. We made sure that our own were taken care of. And somehow along the way, that narrative has changed, or that model has changed. And we're kind of like, yep, I've got, me and mine and my direct family, and we're good. And like, we have to walk back from that and go, no. Is my neighbor okay? Is my friend across the street, is she okay? Is my friend who lives on the west side, east side, north side, south side, are they okay? And what's going on in their communities? And the more we can band together and make sure that we are taking care of our own and making sure that we've got the supports needed, the better off we as a community will be to start addressing some of this.
And Lisa, one of the things that April said it correct, like we have to be there, like we have to be present. When the temptation was, when I was elected judge, was, all right, now that you're a judge, you can now leave your church, right? You're at a certain status now, so you can go ahead, go on and leave them people behind. You've made it. And I said to these people, I said, first of all, y'all black. I don't know why y'all saying that. I said, but second of all, I said, I'm not going to treat my people as though they're a stepping stool or something else. No, if anything, I'm going to be more committed to my church because I want my children who grow up seeing their pastor as a judge, as a black man committed to community, while at the same time still being able to hold some kind of position. And I think that's when we talk about the model, April, about where black men are. I'm telling them, man, y'all need to stop whining about, all the narratives where we not, and y'all need to get in where you fit in somewhere and just sit there and be present so that people can see you contributing in many different facets of your examples of your life. And do that in such a way that they know that we do exist, right? It's not enough to have, and I know the 100 black men, we say what they see is what they will be. If they don't see us, then they'll result to whatever vision of violence they think black men are, and there are caricatures of us everywhere. So we have to make sure that we are committed to being in spaces with our positions on a consistent, everyday, daily basis so that they know we are present, so that we can touch and put our hands around them, hold them, love them, do whatever we can. And I'm stopped right there. So.
We could go on and go on with that. And I can see, Aaron Perry, I'm going to call on you later in this conversation because I can see that you have something to say. But Aaliyah, could you give us some insight from the chat?
Yeah, the chat is really a reflection of the conversation, talking about generational trauma, a pandemic of hopelessness, broken adults not modeling behavior for our children. Our youth don't trust us because we're not modeling appropriate behaviors. Just overall PTSD in our community, a call for our black men to step up, and the division in our community to stop.
I'm seeing a very interesting comment from Beverly, which is very real. This is a very sensitive conversation, but as Beverly says, as the violence increases, and this is internal messaging to our community, whatever positioning we're standing in class-wise, as the violence increases, at the same time, we are requesting defunding of the police in this affluent white state. The violence only supports the white narrative that the current system of law enforcement is appropriate and necessary. Let that sink in. And I was having this thought myself yesterday as we're in the midst of this triple pandemic of racism, COVID-19, and police brutality, and we're asking for system change. We're demanding system change. We're demanding defunding of the police, meaning reducing police budgets to divert public funding to community building and system change that equips families and communities with the resources, tools, and access they need to be stable. So take money out of law enforcement and put it into opportunity and equity creation to address those big social economic barriers. The violence serves to undermine those efforts in so many ways because people become tone deaf. They're not nuanced in their understanding of the drivers of these conditions in our community. They don't care about the complexities that we know exist. They just care about controlling crime. This makes our charge very, very challenging. We've talked a lot about men, about mothers, and I'm asking a question, but I'm kind of framing the question and making a statement as well. We have to be so honest, you all, as a Black community, about what has happened to our broader African-American community in the United States over time. When we think about parts of our community, like Judge Mitchell said, and Aurielle and April, who have been truly disconnected. There was a book written many years ago that talked about the true underclass, folks who have been completely divested in. And you can look historically to our journey as Black folks in the South, from slavery, post-slavery, our migration from South to North for greater opportunities. That's what brought so many of us to Chicago, to Milwaukee, to Madison, to New York, to bigger cities in pursuit of jobs, in pursuit of economic security, in pursuit of opportunity. And we came for a while in wartime and we had opportunity, and then we saw the same encroaching impact of deliberate racism, deliberate efforts to move us out of those places of opportunity, and the creation of ghettos brought on by the starvation of Black communities of resources, by white flight, where work and industry was taken out of the inner city, out to the suburbs to create the ghettos, to create a permanent underclass. I can't remember the author who wrote about the permanent underclass, a forgotten and neglected segment of our community where, yes, they are targeted by policing. They are entering the criminal justice system at young ages, starting with our babies. We know that they determine in our criminal justice system the number of beds they need in prisons based on third grade reading scores. They can predict that a child who does not get an adequate education will most likely end up being an offender, and they plan prison capacity based on third and fourth grade reading scores. So this is a systemic thing. We talk about the impact of generational poverty, generational exclusion from opportunity on families. What does it mean? It means Black men as fathers, as breadwinners, as major, arms of their family, have been attacked by a criminal justice system where they're overrepresented, where they've been hit by triple and quadruple levels of unemployment. We've seen social policies, social welfare policies that exclude men, that aid women and exclude men. So you can't get the assistance if your child's father is in the house. So a system that engineered disconnected, dismantled families, a system that engineered dismantled Black families that became culture in some parts of our community because of the dependency on resources that we could not get in other places. And that then results in single mothers, stressed mothers, raising children alone, raising children sometimes to the point of overwhelm. Like you said, Judge, in court, I put my hands up. I don't know what to do with this boy. You take him. I done tried. His father is locked up. His uncle is locked up. His grandfather is. It's a cycle, and it's a very serious one. This is very touchy conversation. This is very sensitive when we talk about these deep issues in our community that remain unresolved, and the class warfare within our own community too, the us versus them, and that's not my community, that's that. I've been guilty of that at times when I see my own African-American sons profiled and targeted by police because of the perception of them being criminal, them being dangerous, and even having one of my sons nearly killed here in Madison 5 years ago by another young Black man whose life reads as a traumatic from birth to now experience of neglect and all the things that we've talked about. And so it's complicated, right? Because we want system change that supports Black families in being stable, but also want my children to be safe when they go outside, right? And I want people who harm them to be accountable and be held to the law of the land. It's complicated. So with all of that background, how do we address the social justice pieces, the root causes of this violence from the root of what I just laid out systemically, historically, that has produced disconnected, desensitized segments of our community where violence has become in some ways a way of life? April, if you can help us with that, and then Aurielle, and then Judge Mitchell.
I mean, I think, to be blunt, we need to stop looking to the white people to fix the issue, because as I mentioned before, the system's working. It's set up to do exactly what it's doing, from the welfare system, Lisa, that you mentioned, if the man is in the house, to the criminal justice system. So we just need to put our shit aside, to be honest, and be like, look, we have to come together. I gotta represent Aaliyah. Because seriously, like there's just so much division, and nothing's going to get changed unless we don't come together. Like so Urban Triage responded to the shooting at the repast that happened, I believe it was last Tuesday. We had a community conversation the following Wednesday, asking people to come together. Like, let's talk about what it is that's happening. And during that conversation, there was people from all over that came. And what we have to do is, some people are parts of organizations, and that's great, but we need to come together as people. Forget your organization, forget what side of town you live on. You know what I'm saying? Like, we just need to come together as Black people, as a family, and say, okay, what can we do to fix this? We need to be able, because there's going to be people that came out of prison that can relate to the people that are shooting. They're not babies, they're adults. These are grown men, right? There are issues that they're dealing with that we have to be able to, like Pastor Mitchell said, like, they don't see themselves, they don't have a connection. So they're doing the only thing that they know. So at some degree, we can't really blame them, because that's the system that they've been raised in. That's their family, honestly, that's their family system. So we need to not judge their family system and go and meet them where they're at to say, how can we help them and how can we impact them on a personal level? It has to be personal. We have to build relationships. If we don't build relationships with these people, we're not going to get through to them. That's why I'm saying we can't keep throwing programs. It can't be so much systematic. It has to be relational.
Mm-hmm.
You're speaking to such a critical issue. You know, we hate sometimes to go back and talk in a nostalgic way about the way the Black community used to be, but it is truth to that. You know, in the years of my grandparents and great grandparents' families, we still had racial inequality. We had overt racism. We had lynchings as a daily practice in this. Like, your very safety and existence as a Black person was always under threat. And we were broke and we were poor. We were all in the same positioning. But somehow, pre-integration, we seem to have systems in place of supporting community and coming together to help co-raise each other's children, to help one another when we were down. We also had intact Black families. We actually had what's called intact Black families, where men and women were raising children together, whether married, mostly married, or whether not married. We had men and women in the home together raising children. And that's a dynamic that has significantly shifted in huge segments of our community that can be mapped back specifically to welfare policy and economic policies in our countries. How do we talk about that sensitive issue, Pastor Judge Mitchell, of dismantled, displaced Black families under duress?
You want me to go, or you want Aurielle?
I want you to go, since I'm looking at you now, and then I'll ask Aurielle.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, one, I think we have to be honest with this. We have to give our people a lens to be able to have a discussion about what racism really is, right? People not liking you or people talking crazy about you, man, they can kick bricks, right? They can have all their opinions, but racism is about an internalized messaging narrative that says that I'm inferior and they're superior, right? The majority of our own community doesn't have a language to describe what racism is, and that inferiority complex is not something that just is in the minds of white folks, it's also in the minds of our own people. So we have to begin to teach them that the tapes that we have been given, the tapes that have been commercialized, the tapes that have been preached in churches, and, you know, just because they sing in nice lyrics and nice, all these beats and all this other stuff, all it is doing is embedding a sense of inferiority within our culture so that they don't understand that these people don't have power unless you give it to them, right? That, you know, I keep using this Frederick Douglass quote, it is far easier to build strong children than to repair broken men and women, because the idea is we give power, right? The only way the criminal justice system is going to function is that we keep feeding these babies into them. We keep feeding these systems into them. And so until we get that up under our belt, we're never going to be able to hold fast to the fact of what it means, right, to change that narrative. I remember having a hard conversation with some Black leaders, and they looked at me like I was crazy because they were saying to us, like, we need to have people coming out of prison to go talk to these kids. And I was like, how about you go have people who ain't never been to prison go talk to these kids? And they were saying, well, no, you need to understand we the ones who got the real life experience. I said, no, you have the real life experience of going to prison first. How about going to college college first and getting a master's degree first and getting married first. How about that? I ain't looking at prison, and I'm not going unless I choose to go there. So we can talk about different narratives, because Black folks were embodying the idea that there was a rite of passage of prison for these young people, rather than saying, you don't have to go, that ain't even in your future. We've already accepted that inferior label, and because of that, we can't begin to remaster what our narrative will be. Our Black families have been broken apart. The war on drugs, the intentional efforts that they've done to make sure that we don't have the requisite capacity, all this tension between how you co-parent, and Black women don't want this, and child support, all these big stuff that we see on TV, even stuff that we see on media. Like, I ain't gonna lie to you. Like, I know some people love Tyler Perry, but I can't stand watching Tyler Perry movie, because every time you watch a Tyler Perry movie, every Black man in there ain't worth nothing. He trash. And I keep saying the media, even media controlled by Black people, looks at us like we are horrible. And so when we try to engage in loving, sane relationships with Black women, and I love Black women, that's it. That's my cup of tea. That's my cup of coffee. That's what I'm gonna always drink. That's all I'm gonna always be around. When you see that, it is hard to be able to do that in an environment where people sometimes demonize us as though we can't be good husbands or be faithful fathers or be faithful friends. So we have to, that's what I mean, all of that comes from a label of inferiority that we have to begin to deconstruct and repurpose the narrative, so that we have the power to ensure that if my son ain't the only one who's going to be struggling. I want to make sure that your sons and April's sons and children and daughters and all these other people feel the love when they come into all of our presence, and that they're safe to do so. So the work is the work, because we have to do it. Stop looking on white folks to come up in here and give us the salvation. Ain't no Superman gonna come up in here. The only people that's gonna do it is gonna be called Black Panthers. You need to be Black Panthers. That's what you need. And put you some clothes on, get you some Wakanda going on, and do whatever you got to do to get back and control your systems of power, your systems of economy, your systems of support, and your systems of spirituality. Until you control it with a Black consciousness, the hell with the rest of what we're talking about. We got to control it, and we have the power to do so. Stop looking for them to do it. We got to do it. We can do it. We've been doing it, and we got to make sure that this new generation understands the power that we all possess and have possessed from the very beginning. All right?
Yes. And, ooh, Pastor Mitchell, and we have done this before, y'all. We came out of slavery with nothing, and our first order of business was to open our own schools to educate our own children with no money from the system. We opened our own business to cater to each other's needs in our community with no government sponsorship. We came out of bondage 400 years building the infrastructure to care for our families, our communities, and our children. This is our history. We can't be perplexed right now by what we need to do. And I honor what you said, Pastor, because we're hearing people say now the police need to do something, the mayor needs to do something. What they gonna do? What is the police gonna do but show up after something has already happened and wait in their cars until all the shooting stops before they get out to do something about what happened? That's not the appropriate response. What is the mayor gonna do other than what the mayor could do, what mayors everywhere could do, is redirect resources to pour into building strong families and communities in a community-informed way, build infrastructure. But other than that, what are we asking the mayor to show up to do in the Black community to solve this issue? What are we asking the mayor and the police to do? Aurielle, what can you add to this? How do we reestablish strength and capacity within our own community to solve these challenges?
Yeah, first and foremost, I'm feeling a little disadvantaged coming right after Pastor Mitchell, and snaps to all of the things you said, right? Because this is a we thing. We have to feel empowered. We have to address our own issues that live both within us and live in our community to address this issue. And I wholeheartedly agree that we cannot, should not, will not wait for our white community to solve this for us, or our government structures to solve this for us. We have to have the power and the influence to say, this is what we are going to do to address this. This is what we are going to do. And I think it's been interesting both working in government sectors and private sectors and and throughout my time in violence prevention, because I do very much feel that that's the narrative. Well, we have to wait for funding, and we have to wait for this, and we have to get permission for this. I'm not waiting for permission. We are going to do this. We need to do this. No one is going to take care of us but us. And until we can start showing that we are going to do this is when we'll get the buy-in from everyone else. And this is where, you know, I've had to kind of go back and kind of take off and put back on my public health hat a few times, you know, as I'm having conversations with the police department, as I'm having conversations with the mayor's office, to say that this is a bigger thing that's not going to be solved in an hour-long meeting to talk about how we're going to fix violence prevention. This is hundreds of years of both systemic, interpersonal, community, misunderstandings, violence, slavery, poverty, socioeconomic disadvantages, educational disadvantages, health and racial equity issues. It is not going to be solved in an hour-long meeting. And more importantly, I'm not the representative for our entire community. We need others at the table. We need others with diverse experiences and backgrounds at this table in order to inform what we as the community are going to do, and how you as our government entity can support us and be our cheerleaders in how we fix our own issues. And I think that's really where this important driving force behind violence prevention is and needs to start, and has started, and needs to grow and flourish.
Oh, so many things there. These answers are powerful. I think we lost Aaron Perry. I wanted to call on him after giving our guest today adequate time to answer questions, but we'll have Aaron on next week, you all, if the team can make a note of that and continue with him. I want to pull out a comment from Aline Buckner, which hits me at the core because what she's saying is true. And I want to qualify what I said earlier to be clear. We're not letting systems off the hook. We're not letting systems say you have no position or no power in changing this. What we're saying to systems is give us the resources and move out of the way. We're talking about reparations, restoring to our community all the things that were taken, all the things that were intentionally not given for all the years of economic disenfranchisement, of systematic, intentional policy efforts to dismantle us. We need the resources. In Aileen's words, we need our reparations from the white man that were taken and to have it given back so we can take care of our own. These are difficult conversations, you all. These are controversial, uncomfortable conversations, but that historical truth of the disenfranchisement, the divestment really sits at the core. We need the resources. When folks say defund the police, that is what they mean. Divert resources, allocate dollars to communities most impacted among the organizations closest to the issue, to the families who are most impacted. What does that look like? How could reparations, how could restoration, if we're making demands of our systems and telling our government, city, state, local, nationally, telling our leadership, what are we demanding? What do we need to build our own capacity, Pastor Mitchell, to restore our ability to solve our own community issues?
Can I just give a shout out to your husband?
Yes.
So anytime we talk about the communities, the white communities concerned about violence, I'll say to them, oh, do y'all remember when a guy named Kaleem Care was trying to open up a school for Black boys so he could sit them down and educate them and bring in mentors and create a different model and be able to support them so that they would fall through the cracks or the crevices? Y'all remember what that looks like? And remember how so many systemically people came out and denied his ability and put pressure so he couldn't open his school? Anybody remember that? Exactly. So anytime they start talking about violence, I'm like, well, let's talk about how you systemically stopped the Black man from being able to stop the violence. And when he was willing to put his family and his life at risk to start this, y'all said no. To the degree that he had to wait for a conservative Republican governor to be able to give charter schools the ability so he could open up a preschool. That's what he had to rely on, not the liberals. That's whatever. Anyway,
Amen,
I
amen.
just when they talk about violence, I want to talk about the denial of opportunities for us to resolve and embrace our communities to the degree in which you say you are concerned, but you're really not. So I'll let my other sister start on that question while I write my notes so I can answer. But I had to put that in there because as soon as people start talking about violence, I'm like, every time you talk about it, I'm gonna bring up Kaleem Care. Every time you say that the black community ain't do it, I'm gonna bring up Kaleem Care because that black man was fighting hard just to open up an alternative so that these babies, think about it right now, the same babies, if they had opened up that school, right? If they had opened up that academy for him, those same babies who are now 15, 16, 17 years old would have processed through him 10 years ago, and they will be well on to their journey with some nice coats on, looking good, nice ties, and all that other stuff.
Going to college, going into a trade, being productive.
That's all I got to say. That's all I got to say.
So next week we're gonna have Kaleem on. We're gonna have Aaron Perry. Come on, y'all. We're gonna line this up right now. That was gonna happen anyway, but we're gonna speed that up. And I want to say I really thank you, Pastor Everett, for bringing it up because our community has been fighting. So I get frustrated sometimes when I hear people say, well, what is the Black community doing? We ain't coming together. That's not true. You know, we understand internally, like every community, we got disagreements, we got factions, we got positioning, but we have been working to solve our own problems without resources, with our own resources when no one is watching for centuries, literally. And that is still the case. There's so many organizations, there's individuals, there's just community people pulling out their own wallet, trying to be there for children, raising other people's kids. There's grandparents raising kids. There's aunts. Black families are fighting against incredible forces to keep themselves intact. Black mothers are working 3 and 4 jobs. Black fathers are trying, and for the Black fathers who are there, who get ignored and get denied, whose existence becomes invisible in this narrative. Black fathers who are raising their children and supporting their children's mothers as husbands or as co-parents. We wave to you this morning and we give you honor because you get drowned out in these discussions, and we can't allow that to happen because that is a real part of who we are as well. But Black families and Black folks are doing whatever work is happening to change this issue. It's happening first on the backs of Black folks. So let's acknowledge that. I want to give honor to Urban Triage, whose training academy for parents is one powerful thing that's happening in our community every day that is helping families frame and define this predicament that we're finding ourselves in and to build that internal capacity to create the change that we need internally. That's a powerful piece. I know Nikki Conklin over there on the west side in the Wexford Ridge community is a part of a group of community leaders who are building capacity in that neighborhood and training people up to be vocal and demanding systemic justice, housing justice, employment justice, all types of things. And I can name so many other folks on this call. This work is powerful and we're doing it. April, and you all, I want to apologize to you personally because I'm traveling. I'm not even in Wisconsin right now, and I'm off in my home city, which is plagued by similar issues. But in setting up this event today, which was designed to be an hour and a half, because we know it would go further than our normal hour, I probably put 1 hour in the time frame, but we're going to go beyond 10 o'clock. We're going to go to 10:30. So for those of you who can stay with us, please do. And to our speakers, let us know if that works for you and we can play by ear. We were talking about restoring our families, getting the resources that we need. This discussion about reparations is a controversial one. We know that there are members in our Congress, Black senators and representatives primarily, who've been pushing for reparations for years and years and years. There is some traction gaining in that conversation, but from the concept of restoration and reparations, April, what would your comments be about how that would look, why that is crucial for systems to begin to divert resources back into our communities for us to be able to do the work that needs to be done?
Yeah, so they need to run us our check so that we can actually put, so we
Just
can
write the check, y'all. Just write
checks.
the check.
Um, because the complaint, like, I don't remember who mentioned it, but about, oh, the Black community's not doing this. You guys need to, we've been doing the work, but we've been doing it with our resources. So imagine what we could do with the resources, right? So the system is set up the way it is. We need money so that we can start doing our community organizing, so we can get people out there. You mentioned the urban triage, supporting healthy Black families. So I don't think a lot of people know we actually pay participants to be in that course. It's not only free to them, but we pay them every week, so that, because the model of that is for us by us to sustain our community. We want to not only educate them, but help them financially. Before COVID, when it was in person, we had childcare provided them dinner and paid them. Now that it's virtual, we're just, online. But so, like, we need more programs like that, where we're not only educating our people about our own history, our own trauma, post-traumatic slave syndrome, which is something I learned about going through that course. It's ingrained in our DNA. Like, there are epidemiologists who have studied that it is actually ingrained in our DNA and passed down to us. So it's not just this thing of, if you see trauma, like, for example, 9/11, right? People are affected by 9/11 that weren't even there, just seeing it. So imagine what it was like with slavery, and then passing that down one by one by one. So it's just, I don't even know, like, I don't even know where to begin in terms of what the different community programs could be, but there's people here doing the work, and we just need to spread it out. Think about how many more people we could serve if we were able to have money put behind programs like that, if we're able to provide mental health resources for our community. I mean, it's a huge stigma in the Black community in regards to mental health. But honestly, like, we need help. We can't do this without treating ourselves first. How can we go and help someone else if we're still dealing with our own trauma? And then our trauma is affecting how we parent our kids, and so on and so forth. And then it's just a cycle. So we need mental health support. We need peer support. We need so many things. I don't even know. Aurielle, go ahead.
As you speak about this and we talk about reparations and funding, we can have all those things. Right now, mental health services are very difficult to access, and it has been innovative African American, Black of color therapists and professionals who, through this COVID period, that's exacerbated all of the suffering, who have really created these very unique solutions. There's a group of Black mental health providers who've offered some free therapy, or there's a bunch of Black philanthropists who've come together and pooled their money to make therapy free and accessible to Black men or different parts of our community. So we do have resources too. That hinges on another part of this conversation, as we demand what we deserve, what we need from systems who have supported restoration and reparation efforts for other communities historically, but haven't for us. We also need to look to the fact that we're not a poor people, y'all. We're not a poor people, and we have to get that mindset of poverty and lack, or we don't have enough, or there's dearth of resources. We are among the biggest consumer groups in this country that drive trillions of dollars, at least billions of dollars each year in the gross domestic product from our spending. We have money to fund our own interventions. We have money to donate to the Foundation for Black Women's Wellness, to Urban Triage, to Freedom Inc. We got money. We got money to put in the offering plate at our churches that we go to on Sunday mornings, that can build institutions that we truly own, to build the structure. We got money to give to Nehemiah. We got money to give to One City. We got money to give, and we need to be giving it more abundantly, because that's the only way we build infrastructure, is two ways. Well, three ways, really. We demand systems pay back what they took, okay? We then support our own community institutions. We start them and we fund them, right? We fund the work that our own community is doing. And then third, we own the means of production by opening businesses where we are controlling our own economy as a part of the bigger economy. We know the answers, right? We got the tools, but we need to believe that we have the tools, and we need to exercise those tools and fund our own restoration and see ourselves as one community. Let's look at the chat, Aaliyah. It is on fire. There is so much in this chat. What are we hearing from our guests?
There's so much. I mean, there's conversations around what it would take, what we have in the community. Felicia's talking about grief support, counseling, peer support. Folks are also talking about the Neighborhood Organizing Institute, just all of the, again, just naming and calling out organizations that are Black owned or Black supported that give us opportunity. And then Kwesi did shout out that there's a press conference at Penn Park today with community members at 11 a.m. to talk about the violence in the community and being the first step in a comprehensive plan, which I'm very interested in seeing what that's going to look like and how that's community informed. So there's just a lot of conversation about what we were seeing historically in the 90s, what we're seeing now, and just the thread that's tying it all together that our guests have spoke so eloquently about.
Oh, Lord. So for more clarification, Kwesi said City Council President Sherry Carter is holding a press conference at Penn Park at 11 a.m. with community members to speak to the violence in the community and to take a first step in a comprehensive plan. How do we bring ourselves together, Aurielle, as we develop a comprehensive community plan as African-American folks with relationships and ties to churches, to systems? Many people on this call work for systems, retired from systems. We have community relationships, we have organizations we run. How do we begin to establish a transformational blueprint to restore our families and to address one of the byproducts of the instability being violence and mental health trauma? What do we do?
Yeah, so I think the first thing we do is that self-recognition that this is going to be work, ongoing work. It's going to be a lot of work, and we can lessen that burden by coming together. And so in a way for us to come together to develop what this comprehensive plan is, I think it's going to require all of us to do a little bit of like self-reflection and self-recognition as to what are some of the challenges, barriers that I, my family, my friends, my neighbors are experiencing, and what are some things that I would like to see that I think could mitigate some of that, right? Or what's missing? What are the gaps, or what are the things that are working and are in danger of going away because they need additional support? I think those are the things that need to come forth and come to the table, especially, in our current system with those that may have the resources and the planning tools and the funding. Those are the things we need to know about. I was kind of reading through the chat, and I have to say it's nice and disheartening that I get a chance to do something besides COVID for a little bit. But as I'm reading through the chat and looking at all of these resources, some of these I'm hearing about for the first time. And so now I'm taking notes and going like, okay, track back to this organization, right? Because as we talk about internally from a public health perspective, what we are doing to contribute to this overall comprehensive plan for violence prevention, a lot of that is not only the acknowledgement of services, especially Black-oriented services that exist and service providers that exist, but also how do we develop tools for people to recognize when either themselves or someone they know is struggling and in need of one of those services. And then I think that third component is how do we do a better job of connecting individuals to those services and removing the barriers for them to access them. So I'd say like the first step is awareness, and how do we build more tools around awareness of, yep, I need to do a self-check-in with myself and I need help and this is what I need help in and this is where I can go. Or that awareness that, yep, you are my neighbor, friend, colleague, someone I go to church with, and you look like you are struggling. How can I help you? How can I point you in the right direction? Again, removing those access to barriers and making sure that we are doing everything that we can to support anybody who needs those services. And then that third is connecting them to the services and making sure those services still exist, especially the ones that are working, and identifying what we don't have and creating that.
Absolutely. And I love what you're saying, Aurielle, in terms of systems becoming more aware. Oftentimes we find ourselves as the foundation, and this is true for other Black-led organizations, where systems that have the dollars, right? Systems that have the millions of dollars, who are charged with solving the challenges that we're speaking about today, don't know what to do. Right? They're not close enough to the community. They're not representative of the community, and they got dollars, but we see no change. We've been talking about disparity and the growing disparities in Madison and Dane County and Wisconsin over the past 30 years since we started measuring and disaggregating data by race, there has been virtually no change in key quality of life measures. And in fact, at least we know in the health arena, we see worsening health outcomes for Black women, for Black men, for Black babies, even in this very wealthy, well-resourced community and state where we have world-ranked health systems and highly ranked quality of life measures on national reports, yet the tale of two cities for Black families. And we find ourselves advising moneyed institutions about what to do and how to do it, and that makes no sense. I like this idea of systems becoming capable of recognizing community expertise and diverting system resources to community, to the organizations closest to the work. And we do see some of that happening. Right now, in the midst of COVID, we see organizations behaving in new ways, and we encourage that. We see organizations calling and scouting and saying, who's doing the work? We want to fund those initiatives. And that's a very sincere reach out. We want and need that to become the norm, not just in the midst of a global pandemic crisis, but the norm of how our systems behave and building community capacity and infrastructure to solve the challenges ourselves, which is ultimately what I know every Black person I talk to wants to solve these challenges ourselves with resources. Pastor Mitchell, Judge Mitchell, how do we begin to carve this path to transformational restoration in our community that will stave off this violence that we're seeing and all the other maladies that we continue to talk about?
I'm going to go back to something that April said earlier. She said it's about being relational. And we have to then think about, all right, how do we build a relational transformational system? And I think it goes back to, I think Dave Chappelle said it during the comedy show. He says, I grew up broke, but I was never poor. And we have to make sure that people understand that just because you don't have economics doesn't mean you're poor. You can be broke, but still have value. And then those individual conversations that we have, maximize that value of the things that we need to talk about. Like how do you respect our elders? How do you learn how to code switch so that you can be in the environment that you want to be in? How do you still stay authentically Black and committed to your conversations? How do we support leadership and not tear down leaders at the same time? Or all conglomerations of things that I think are value systems that we want to make sure that we also support. And then we also want to start thinking about transformation in terms of economics. Now, I am big on, maybe transforming how people think and feel. But I think if you transform how people spend their money and think about money, I think you will find values be transformed as well. Because a part of internalized racism is the fact that they already know how we're going to spend our money. So they know that if they send us checks, they'd be happy to send us checks because they already know what we're going to spend our money on. We're not going to save our money and serve it to invest it because they have put inside of us a notion that we need to do stuff like spend money on shoes when we don't have money to spend on the books or a Chromebook or an investment tool. So in addition to teaching our community about uprooting racism, we need to also teach them about the importance of investments and financing and saving. Home ownership may be one portion of it, but we have to teach them about money and how that money works. We don't like to talk about that a lot because people who are broke don't think that they have a lot. But as that sister put in the chat, we have a whole lot of economic buying power that we have not utilized. COVID has shown us one thing. If you stop buying, their systems don't work. They need you to buy in order for their systems to work. And if you just say no, or I'm not, or I can't, or I won't, then all that little bitty stuff you spending your money on won't work. And then let me put a plug in for my own self right here. Is that I was just appointed as the judge to oversee the juvenile division for Dane County. And so I start that role September 1st. And one of the things that I'm interested in trying to do is bringing more of our Black and brown bodies into the court system and highlighting the things that we can do. So I know we only got limited time. So I'm looking at this. I'm looking at how can we increase Black foster home care?
Yes.
Shout out to Brandy Grayson, who's a foster mom at Urban Triage, but she's also a dedicated foster mom as well. We need more foster families. I need a whole lot more Black foster families. Let me give y'all some insight. There's only 30 kids that created all the chaos sometimes in Dane County. 30 kids. That's it. Just 30. Just 30 kids. And about half of them have nowhere to go. If we have Black foster families, that will give us some indication of how to support these kids so I don't have to send them off to prison. I would also say, how can we support more of, getting more of our community groups inside of supporting mentoring? We have a mentoring project where we only have 2 mentors. And that's not enough to sustain us, right? The moment that I need real-time people that I can contact in real time to send kids and create alternatives. And I'm looking to create all kinds of different alternatives, whether it's sending them to go get some haircuts out there with Frog, with his business, or am I sending him to sending a young Black girl to Black, woman's wellness to be an intern, and that's your sentence. Your sentence is your internship. There's so many different things that we can do that don't have nothing to do with jail. But I just need to make sure that the community is willing to do that so that we set up a pipeline toward equity and not a pipeline toward further incarceration. And then lastly, it is supporting our own educational models, right? If our children are being traumatized in these schools, then we need to get them out these schools. And we need to put them in places that will educate them and protect them and nurture them so that they're not just being, receiving more trauma. I think in many ways, many Black children, and mine included, like being at home because they're not experiencing all this trauma in these schools. And they get to see our Black faces all the time, even though sometimes I'll be glad when they leave, but they at least get a chance to just see our faces all the time, get hundreds of hugs all day long. And that is a part of what has been missing in the narrative around our education and our strength. So I think those are some things that I would deposit as, at least beginning frameworks to give us some practical things that we can do to start changing the dial in very significant ways for a lot of us.
Oh, we're going to replay this call back because we're going to grab a lot of what has been said, and we need to send this back out to the community. This is so rich. I've heard many of you say we need to control our economics. We absolutely need to control who is educating our children and the quality of that experience. And we have to expand our presence in our community right now to be there for our young people as we're rebuilding. We do need Black foster homes. One of the other disparities in this community is Black children are 3 to 4 times more represented in the foster care system in Dane County because of the dismantling of Black families, where we see family separation. I worked in juvenile justice in Madison for about 8 years in my earlier days when I was a very young woman, and I've worked in family preservation programs. My job was to go to court and advocate to keep families together and to help walk them through what we call conditions of return, to ensure that mostly Black mothers, single Black mothers, would not lose their children to the foster care system or to adopting, getting their kids adopted out and losing their parental rights. In fact, these are very complex cases, and there is no advocacy arm in this community to deal with the overrepresentation of Black families in our Child Protective Services division, where Black children and families are being separated wholesale, you all, in this community. Our organization has served as we can, because it's not really we don't have the capacity to do it, but there's no one else to do it. So going to court with mothers in front of judges and district attorneys to fight for them to have the opportunity to keep their children in their home is necessary and excruciating work, as these cases can drag out for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And there really is no infrastructure. Pastor Mitchell, you've been crucial in our work behind the scenes, along with the NAACP, who had lent its time through Greg Jones, who's been with us on a case for 7 years, in which we've been able to get 2 out of 3 of a mother's children back out of a very complicated case where she was deemed to be abusive and neglectful. And we know how perception shapes that process as well. So it's a lot going on, you all. This foster care system and the maintenance and the stability and the restoration of our families, the protection of our family in a system that works on so many levels to disconnect and disband is another crucial conversation. We got to take this over. April, what would you add to the transformational actions we need to take for restoration?
To Pastor Mitchell's point, the mentorship, you know, I'm real big on relationships, but I think the mentorship piece is huge. And it's disheartening to hear that there's only 2 mentors in your program, Pastor. That's crazy. So, I mean, I'll put a call out to the community to say, again, where y'all at? Like, you don't have to have an organization. You don't have to have a ton of money. Time is great impact on people. So I would plug Pastor Mitchell's mentorship program, and then just start building relationships with people in your own community. It doesn't have to be on this grandiose level. It doesn't have to be, like I said, on an organizational level, because it's a domino effect. You impact one person, then they pay it forward and impact somebody else, and it keeps going and going and going. So we could start small with relationship building. We could start small with just within our own community. And then I think, again, I've said this, I'm gonna sound like a broken record, but we need to put our own stuff aside and come together as a community and look at the bigger picture. Look at the community as a whole instead of us versus them within our own community.
You said a mouthful with that, April. Speaking to this, you know, there in our own private conversations, there is an awareness, there is this sense, and there is this feeling that our community is tired, right? Our community is tired. Our Black families, even, you know, middle class, working class, underclass, and I don't say that lightly as designation, but to prove the point. Black families are traumatized in many ways, no matter what your positioning. We are managing our own day-to-day survival. We are all in some way taking care of extended family, not just our household. We are working against, you know, systems, working within systems, trying to make change. People are exhausted when they come home at the end of the night. They're tired. The thought of where am I going to find 4 hours a week or 2 hours a week to mentor? Where am I going to find hours in my week to go serve on a board or to assist this organization when I am drained and feeling the weight of the heaviness of just existing day to day, and particularly now? How do we address what feels like a never-ending battle, a never-ending sojourn as African-American people pushing against and uphill these forces so that we can refresh and restore ourselves and be present in all these ways that most of us want to be? How do we begin to tend to that very real reality, Aurielle, especially from a public health and well-being perspective? Can we please unmute Aurielle, you guys?
Sorry, it wasn't the mute. It was definitely my microphone as my internet was coming in and out. So I apologize. You cut out a little bit for me, so I missed the middle of the question.
How do we deal with what many have cited as an exhaustion, a mental exhaustion within our community, overwhelmed at the thought of how we can extend ourselves even more to do even more to fill these gaps in our community, so that we can begin to do more of the transformational work that we want to do, but feel tired and thinking about doing.
Yeah.
You know, systems can wear you down. This systemic thing we're operating in you all for 400 years, it takes spiritual fortitude, right? We need Pastor Everett to just pray on all of us this morning so we have the strength to continue navigating this territory, because this is heavy stuff, right? It's heavy stuff, and yet we got to continue on in our own lives. So how do we do that? How do we do that?
So I think one of the most and first and foremost important steps is conversations like these, right? Where we can get together and not feel so alone in this, wanting to do more, wanting to contribute more. What do? I don't know what to do. Not, you know, feeling like you can't take on another thing between your family, your job, COVID-19, violence that's happening in the community. You know, so I think it's one, it really helps to have these types of conversations where we can talk about how we can come together and tackle these huge issues collectively, right? Because if we all take a little bit of the burden on, it doesn't seem like such a huge feat and such a huge weight. I think the other thing is we also have to like do some of that self-reflection, right? Of, okay, yep, I may not be able to solve 400 years of systemic racism today, and that's okay. But what I can do is a small piece to, I can check on my neighbor, or I can go on the website or do some Googling and some homework to see, you know what, yeah, I can't maybe take on a foster child due to my situation, but I can get involved with Foundation for Black Women's Wellness or urban triage, or I can do some mentoring, or I can get more involved with my church and my community, right? It's all for what you feasibly feel that you can take on and contribute. And I think sometimes we underestimate, just due to the magnitude of all the things that we are facing and trying to combat, that a little bit does go a long way. And we have to kind of remember that, especially as we talk about violence, with it being such a personal level and individual level issue that also affects us as the community at large.
That's an excellent answer to begin to close out on. But we have to step in where we can. We have to take the limited energies and resources we have and find that one way, even if it's just participating in these conversations or messaging an organization and offering the level of support that you feel you have the capacity to do, is striking up conversations in your networks to bring consciousness and awareness to this collective conversation. And it's really coming together, right? I already feel stronger. I already feel like we're getting to solutions right now. I already feel hopeful that we're going to come up with the roadmap and the blueprint that we need in this community to really overcome these disparities and these gaps and this situational violence that we're talking about today, and remember the humanity part of what we're responsible for doing and rebuilding our community and embracing our young people from the beginning, so we're not trying to correct these challenges in the middle and at the end after something has happened. I want to give each speaker an opportunity to give us one closing sentence on what the next step is immediately today with what we know is happening in our community. What is one practical, tangible thing that we can do today in the midst of this uptick of violence? And then we have a special request, and I want to respect everyone on the call's religious or spiritual belief systems. We're not a monolithic people, but there has been a couple requests on the pastor, judge, Honorable Everett Mitchell, closing us out on prayer today. I am so open to that. And I will say, for those who are open to that as well, we will close on that prayer. If you don't want to participate, we respect that and you can leave. If you do want to participate, we will prompt you and ask Pastor Honorable Everett at the end of the call if you could close us out on prayer. But first, what is your 30-second soundbite on the steps forward today, as people are asking, so what do we do right now in the midst of the challenges in our 11-year-old baby who is recovering, to ensure that these incidents begin to be stopped right now? April.
I would say reach out to your extended circle. So not your circle that you talk to every day, your extended circle, and just check on people. Just say, hey, how you doing? Just want to talk about, whatever they want to talk about, just check on them and let them know that you care. Because I think that's part of the issue, is that these people, they don't have anywhere to turn to. They don't have anybody. And sorry, I'm getting emotional, but yeah, so just reach out, check on somebody.
We love you, April. And we thank you for being one of those people who I can say from experience shows up on the scene to be there to embrace those people who don't have anyone, and even shows up to embrace those of us who do have people, because your heart is so loving and so big. We honor your presence in this work. Aurielle, what's the one thing we can do today?
I think the one thing we can do today is that self-reflection and recognize your own power. So for those of you who were not told today or yesterday or even tomorrow, I am here to tell you, you have power. And to own your power, recognize your power, and do something productive with your power. You are stronger than you think, and you can make a difference.
Absolutely. I'm going to say this now because Aurielle said it. I usually say it at the end of the call, but I'm going to say it right now, that as we close, we need to think about knowing thyself, commit to healing thyself. Our wellness, our community healing, you all, starts with us. We have the power and we are our own answer. This chat is so live with suggestions, with ideas, with organizations, with links to where we can place our support to folks doing the work. We have the power. We have the power to get and to do and to create and to sustain whatever we feel is necessary to restore our community. And we need to step fully in that power. Pastor Honorable Judge Mitchell, what is one thing we can do? And then if you could lead us and close us out in prayer, sending love to all of you in advance, because after the prayer, we will end the call and see you back here next week. Pastor.
I would say that the next time you run into a young Black brother or sister, that you stop and you immediately tell them how beautiful they are, how much you love them, how special they are, and that they are not alone in this world. And if they give you permission to give them a hug, even in COVID, you grab them and you hold them and you let them feel the energy of your love to them, and you let them know how much they are honored and how much you appreciate who they are and everything that they have to offer the rest of this world. And I bet you if hundreds of us did the same thing, we will be in a carousel of love for which these kids can draw from and forever be changed, because they realize that they're no longer invisible, but they're seen because we see them.
Amen.
Amen.
Yes.
All right, let's pray. Eternal loving God, we thank you for this conversation. We pray for our young 11-year-old sister who's in this moment, God, in an induced coma, and her family, God. We pray for her mother, her family, her cousins, all of her family who's come in from different parts of the country to be there, God, and we lift her up right now. God, we know that you're a way maker, a miracle worker. God, you can be a light in the darkness because that's who you are. And so, Lord, we just lift her up right now. We lift that energy and that spirit, God. We pray for those who committed the violence. We pray for those in our community who have lost loved ones to this kind of violence. And we pray for all of the pain and suffering and hurt and the tiredness of so many people on this line and so many people we're connected to. And so, Lord, I hope, though, that it rests in the idea that they that wait upon you, God, we shall have renewed strength. And that renewed strength is what we need right now, a renewed vision, a renewed strength that will lead us to get to a place of transformation for our families, for our communities, to be transformed back into a place where we can look at each other and feel strength, and we can look at our families and know that we're there and connected and committed to one another, and that we can build communities that rely on our collective strength, that we can fight through the inadequacies that sometimes we think we have and begin to embrace the superior nature of who we are and stand with that power and stand with that sense of calling. Let us see beauty in ourselves, and let us be returned back to those leaders, God, who pour out so much. Give it back to them, God, so they can continue to refreshen themselves and be ready to lead a new generation back to the places that you called us to be. I love you for them, and I pray a loving and covering over everybody that's on this call. And I pray that, God, your love will continue to extend to them, and that their minds would have a sense of peace, that their purpose would have a sense of clarity, and their passion will stay kindled as the fire needs to burn, so that all of us can keep moving. It is in Jesus' name I pray, and I ask it all. Amen, amen, and amen.
Amen. Thank you, Pastor. We love you all. Have a beautiful week. We have the power. We got this, and we will prevail. We love you all. Have a good rest of your week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.